Lords and ladies, farmers and laborers, welcome to Archive of Ages, where we bring the stories of the past back to life and walk beside the people who once carried them. Tonight, we travel north, not to the age of Viking longships cutting across the sea, but to an earlier world of steep valleys, rough tracks, and hard bargains made under an open sky. This is the world of Hrafnkel Saga. It is a story about a man who loves a horse so fiercely that he swears an oath over it. A story about pride, law, humiliation, and what a person becomes after they lose everything. Some say Hrafnkell is a villain, some say he is a tragic hero. The saga itself doesn't tell you what to think. It simply shows you what happened and leaves the judgment in your hands. So in this episode, we're going to walk through Hrafnkell's life from beginning to end. We'll follow the settlers who built farms out of nothing, the young shepherd who makes one fatal decision, the quiet lawyer who dares to stand up to a powerful priest, and the long, slow revenge that reshapes an entire valley. As you listen, ask yourself, if you had sworn an oath you could never break, what would it take to make you change? Let's go back to Iceland in the days when the land was still being claimed, and nothing was secure except your name and your reputation. The settler and the dream long before Hrafnkell became a name that people whispered with either respect or resentment. There was another man, Hallfredr. He arrived in Iceland during the days when King Haraldr Fairhair ruled Norway, bringing his family across the sea to start a new life on the edges of the known world. Hallfredr first settled in a gentle valley with green slopes and a broad river. The land had a quiet beauty to it, fields that could be cleared, a river that could be crossed, and hills that offered shelter from the worst of the wind. His wife and his 15-year-old son, Hrafnkell, were with him. The boy was already promising, strong, serious, with the kind of presence that makes other people step aside without quite knowing why. The winter passed. A foreign-born maid named Order died there, far from the country she'd been born into. In her memory, the farm took on a new name, and her story became part of the landscape. This is something the sagas do over and over. They tie people to the land so tightly that you can't mention one without the other. When spring came, Hallfredr moved his household northward to a place called Geitaller. The new fields were better, the grazing richer, and the family settled in. But one night Hallfredr had a dream. In the dream, a man stood before him and spoke plainly. "You have settled here carelessly. Move your house west across the river. Your fortune lies there, not here." Hallfredr woke up with the image still sharp in his mind. He was not a man who treated dreams lightly. In this world, a dream wasn't just something you shrugged off over breakfast. It could be a warning or a gift. He listened. He gathered his family and his goods, drove his livestock across the cold river, and built a new home on the far side. That farm became known as Hallfredr Stadir. He lived there into old age, and the saga tells us that he lived well. Back in the old valley he had left behind, the earth itself shifted. A landslip tore the ground and destroyed the house. Two animals he had forgotten there, a goat and a buck, were buried along with it. People remembered that, and from then on the place was called Geitalir, Goat Valley, in honor of the ones who never left. From the very beginning, the saga is telling us something. Fortune is fragile, land can betray you, and a man who listens carefully may live while others are buried under the earth without warning. The valley of Hrafnkell, as the years passed, Hrafnkell grew up. He was the kind of man who didn't stay content as someone else's son forever. He spent his summers riding across the high heaths, following the narrow tracks that threaded between rocky ridges and marshy hollows. One day, traveling along the district of Fljótsdalur, he came over a rise and saw a valley that took his breath away. It lay beyond another valley called Jökuldalur, further inland, higher up. To most people it was empty and remote, a place of thin air, rough ground, and long distances. To Hrafnkell, it looked like opportunity. He rode back to his father and asked him to divide the property. "I want to settle there," he said. "In that valley, I'll make it mine." Hallfredr agreed. He handed over Hrafnkell's share, and the young man went out to build his own life. He chose a site for his farm, set the timbers, and named it Adalboli, literally the main farm, the chief homestead of the valley. He married a woman named Oddbjörg, daughter of Skjaldulfr from Laxardalr. Together they had two sons, Thorir and Asbjörn. Hrafnkell wasn't just building a house, he was staking out a future. Once the buildings were raised and the land was consecrated, Hrafnkell held a grand sacrificial feast. He built a temple there, a proper wooden hof, solid and imposing, with carved pillars and a place to hang sacred objects. Among the gods, he favored Freyr most of all, the god of fertility, harvests, good weather, and peace. To Freyr, Hrafnkell gave the very best of what he owned. Half his wealth, he said, belonged to the god. The fields, the livestock, the gold, everything he had was shared. People began to call him by a longer name, Hrafnkell Freysgodi, Hrafnkell, the priest of Freyr. He didn't keep the valley all for himself. He divided land among other settlers, let them build homes of their own, and made them his dependents. In return, he became not just their neighbor, but their priest and chieftain. They came to him for sacrifices, for advice, for help in lawsuits. In that valley, his word carried weight, but power in the sagas is rarely one-sided. The saga says that Hrafnkell was unruly by nature. He was courteous and cheerful with his own followers, but hard and unfair with those who lived outside his direct control. He took offense quickly and settled disputes with single combat. When he killed someone, he did not pay compensation. He never offered Weregild. He saw no reason to. Some people admired him, others hated him, everyone respected him because they had no choice. The horse and the vow. Among all the things Hrafnkell owned, there was one he loved above the rest. A stallion called Hrafnkell. He was roan-colored, powerful, and unlike any other horse in the herd. Hrafnkell considered Hrafnkell half his own, half Freya's. This was not just an animal, it was a living sign of the god's favor. The horse grazed with 12 mares in the valley, and people noticed him wherever he went. Hrafnkell loved him so fiercely that he swore an oath. Whoever rode Hrafnkell without permission, he would kill. Not fine them, not beat them, not complain, he would kill them. In modern ears, that sounds extreme. But in the world of the saga, oaths are not casual. A man who swears by a god is supposed to mean it. Breaking such a vow is a kind of betrayal, both of the deity and of his own honor. The saga doesn't pause to argue about whether this was wise, it simply tells us Hrafnkell made that vow and then he lived by it, a poor farmer and a capable son. Across the valley from Adalboli, on the eastern side, there was a poorer farm called Hall. A man named Thorbjörn lived there. Thorbjörn did not have much land or wealth, but he had many mouths to feed. His household was full of children and dependents. Among his sons, the eldest was called Einar. Einar was tall and well-mannered, the kind of young man who could fit in comfortably in richer houses. He was strong enough for hard work and sensible enough to handle responsibilities. And that created a problem. One spring, as the days grew longer and the flocks were moved up toward summer pastures, Thorbjörn spoke to his son. "You should find a place of your own," he said. "I have enough hands here, and not enough food. I want your younger brothers and sisters to grow up here, working as laborers, but you can do better. You can earn your own way somewhere else. It's not that I don't value you, it's that our poverty presses on us." Einar listened, but he wasn't thrilled. "You've told me too late," he replied. "All the good summer places are already taken. I don't want to end up with whatever is left over, the worst of the lot." Still, he did what a dutiful son should do. He saddled a horse and rode up to Adalboli to see if Hrafnkell needed a man. Hrafnkell welcomed him into the hall. "You should have come earlier," Hrafnkell said. "If you had, I would have given you first choice of work. Now every position is filled except one." Einar asked what that one was. "I need a shepherd," Hrafnkell told him. "Someone to look after my ewes in the mountain dairy. It is hard work. You'll tend 15 milking ewes at the summer pastures, gather firewood, carry it home for fuel, and generally keep the place going. I will give you room and board in return. 2 half-years of work, on those terms." Einar didn't shy away. "I'll do it," he said. "Work is work." Hrafnkell nodded, but then added one more condition. "You will also be responsible for my stallion, Hrafnkell. In winter and summer, you must keep an eye on him and the mares. But hear this clearly. You must never ride Hrafnkell. I have sworn an oath to kill whoever rides him without permission. There are 12 other mares you can choose from when you need a horse. Take any of them you like, but not him. I've warned you, and as people say, those who warn cannot be blamed." Einar answered that he understood. With so many other horses available, he had no reason to touch the forbidden one. And so the agreement was made. The shepherd's decision, Einar went home briefly to gather his clothing and belongings, then moved up to the mountain dairy. The dairy was at a place called Joturriga in Hrafnkel Saga, where the sheep could graze on the slopes and the women could milk the ewes in the cool morning and evening air. For a while, everything went well. The sheep were safe. No animals went missing. The work was hard, but Einar handled it. Then, in midsummer, something changed. One night, nearly 30 ewes vanished. In this world, losing 30 animals was no small matter. That was wool, milk, lambs, and future income, all gone in a single stroke. Einar went out searching over the rough ground, calling, listening, scanning the hills. Days passed. The weather turned foggy and wet. The missing animals did not appear. Nearly a week later, one morning, the fog finally lifted. The drizzle stopped. Einar woke up and decided to make a more serious push. He took a staff, a bridle, and a riding rug. He walked past a place called Griotagerdi, near the dairy, and there, on the shingle by the river, he saw the missing ewes lying and resting. as if they had never gone anywhere at all. He drove them back toward the dairy, relief in every step, but as he moved them along, another thought grew in his mind. The valley was wide, the sheep could disappear again. There were still hollows and folds of land he had not checked. He could search faster if he had a horse under him. He looked toward the pasture where the herd of horses grazed. The stud was there, 12 mares and 1 stallion, Hrafnkell. Normally, the stallion was shy and hard to approach. He kept to himself, half wild. But that day, when Einar drew near with the bridle, all the horses stood quietly, even Hrafnkell. Einar's mind started its own quiet argument. If I don't ride, the sheep might go missing again. If they vanish, Hrafnkell will be furious anyway. If I ride Hrafnkell just once, just for a few hours, in the high ground where no one sees, how would Hrafnkell ever know? He hesitated. The saga doesn't slow down to describe his feelings in detail, but we can sense the tension, duty to his employer, fear of Hrafnkell's temper, and that oath hanging over everything like a drawn blade. In the end, Einar made his choice. He slipped the bridle onto Hrafnkell, threw the riding rug across the stallion's back, and mounted. The stallion leapt forward with natural power, covering the rough paths as if they were smooth roads. Einar rode all day, from dawn until mid-afternoon. He followed river valleys, crossed heights, checked other dairies, and asked other shepherds if they had seen stray sheep. No one had. Hrafnkell carried him tirelessly. The horse lived up to his reputation, the best animal in the district. At last Einar realized it was time to turn back. The sheep that remained at the dairy still needed him, and he couldn't spend forever chasing a handful that might not even be lost anymore. He turned eastward, heading back toward Hrafnkel Saga. As he came down near Griotagirdi once again, he heard it, the bleating of sheep along the same river gorge he had passed earlier that day. He turned and saw them, the missing ewes, running toward him, the ones he had spent a week searching for suddenly there, as if they had stepped out from behind a curtain. He drove them back with the rest toward the dairy. Hrafnkell was finished, foam streaked the stallion's neck, sweat ran down his sides, and his coat was spattered with mud and mire. When Einar dismounted, the stallion rolled on the ground 12 times, let out a great neigh that echoed along the valley, and then broke into a gallop. Einar tried to catch him, but couldn't. Hrafnkell ran straight home to Adalboli. The oath fulfilled, back at Adalboli, Hrafnkell was sitting at his table when he heard a horse screaming outside. The sound was loud enough and strange enough that he paused and listened. Then he called to a maid. "Go outside," he said. "See what is making that noise. I think it might be Hrafnkell." The maid went out into the yard. There stood the stallion, lathered and trembling, his coat still dripping from the hard ride, his sides streaked with dirt and sweat. She came back in and told Hrafnkell what she had seen. Hrafnkell got up and stepped outside himself. He took one look at Hrafnkell and understood. "The horse has come home to tell on someone," he said quietly, "and I will take revenge for this." He let the stallion go back to the herd, and Hrafnkell walked back up the valley to rejoin the mares, but the damage was already done. Hrafnkell had sworn an oath, and in this world, that wasn't something you simply shrugged off because it suddenly felt inconvenient. That night, he went to bed as usual. He slept soundly. At dawn, he woke, had a horse brought to him, and had it saddled. He put on blue clothes, took an axe in hand, and rode up toward the mountain dairy. The saga makes a point of saying he carried no other weapon. When he arrived, Einar had just finished gathering the ewes into the pen. He was sitting on the low wall, counting them. The women were busy with the milking. They greeted Hrafnkell politely. He asked how things had gone. "Not well," Einar admitted. 30 ewes were missing for a week, but they're back now. Hrafnkell did not complain about the missing animals. That was not what had brought him there. He looked at Einar and asked a different question. "Did you ride Hrafnkell yesterday?" he said. "Even though I forbade it, and there were other horses you could have taken." Einar confessed. He did not try to lie. He said yes, he had ridden the stallion. Hrafnkell acknowledged that telling the truth was better than hiding it, but reminded him of their earlier conversation. The warning had been clear, the vow had been clear. He said that fulfilling his oath would protect him from harm. Then he dismounted. In front of the women at the dairy, in front of the sheep and the low stone walls, he struck Einar with the axe and killed him. Afterwards, Hrafnkell mounted his horse, rode home to Adalboli, and simply found a new shepherd to take over the dairy. Einar's body was carried a little way off and buried near the terrace. A beacon was raised beside his cairn to mark the place and to tell the midday hour when the sun stood directly above it. The saga gives us no speech from Hrafnkell at that moment, no apology, no second thoughts. He had made an oath, and he followed through. A father's grief and an offer refused news travels fast in a valley. Word reached Thorbjörn at Hull that his son was dead. The saga says he was deeply grieved, and we do not need more detail than that. Any parent can imagine the weight. Thorbjörn saddled his horse and rode straight to Adalboli. He asked to speak with Hrafnkell and requested compensation for his son. That was the normal way. When a man was killed, the killer should pay weregild to the family, and there would be some kind of settlement. It might not mend the grief, but it could prevent a blood feud. Hrafnkell refused. He said he had never paid compensation to anyone he had killed, and he did not plan to start now. He had killed many men before and never made amends. However, he admitted that this killing was different. It hurt more, he said, because he had been on good terms with Thorbjörn. As a kind of half gesture, he made another offer. He said he would supply Thorbjörn's household with meat and dairy for the summer and autumn. He would support Thorbjörn's sons and daughters, make sure they had good places to go, and would see to it that Thorbjörn never lacked anything he needed from Hrafnkell's wealth. It was a generous offer in practical terms, and a cruel one in terms of pride. It would mean living off the man who had killed your son. It would mean accepting his help instead of calling him to account. Thorbjörn refused. He suggested they pick an arbitrator and let a third party decide what was fair. Hrafnkell took that badly. For him, asking for arbitration meant putting himself on the same level as Thorbjörn. He said that if Thorbjörn thought himself Hrafnkell's equal, there could be no peace between them. The conversation ended. Thorbjörn left Adalboli and rode down the valley through Hrafnkelsdala toward another man, his brother Bjarni, who lived at Langaholt. He told Bjarni what had happened and asked for help. Bjarni refused. He said Hrafnkell was a dangerous man to challenge. In his view, Thorbjörn had been foolish to turn down Hrafnkell's offer. To him it looked like pride getting in the way of survival. The brothers parted without kindness. Thorbjörn continued on to another farm called Likyabaki, where a man named Sámr lived. Sámr was not rich, but he was known to be learned in the law. He was married, with livestock of his own, and he had a reputation for being both turbulent and clever. He welcomed Thorbjörn and offered him hospitality, but he could see that something was wrong, so he asked what news he brought. Thorbjörn told him the whole story. Sámr listened and answered calmly that it was no surprise if Hrafnkell had killed someone. That was simply his way. When Thorbjörn asked for help, Sámr hesitated. He asked whether Thorbjörn had tried to resolve the matter with Hrafnkell first, and Thorbjörn described the offer and his own refusal. Sámr admitted that Hrafnkell's proposal had been unusual and generous in its own way, and suggested that they might still go back together and ask humbly whether Hrafnkell would keep his word. Thorbjörn did not believe that would work. His mind was fixed. He believed Hrafnkell would refuse. When Sámr showed caution about challenging Hrafnkell in court, Thorbjörn mocked him. He accused him of cowardice and said that if Sámr refused, his fame as a knowledgeable man would shrink. "What would I gain even if we win?" Sámr asked. "Peace of mind," Thorbjörn said. "Even if we lose, I'll have tried." Reluctantly, Sámr agreed to take the case, not because he thought it would succeed, but because of kinship. Thorbjörn was family, and in this world that still meant something. They shook hands, and with that handshake, Sámr accepted a burden that would change his entire life. The Thing and the Clever brothers. Sámr declared Hrafnkell guilty of manslaughter and began preparing a blood feud case against him. The winter and the following summer passed with no major moves from either side, but everyone knew the issue wasn't dead. When the time came to travel to the National Assembly, the Althing at Thingvellir, Sámr gathered what men he could. Most of them, the saga says, were wanderers and poor men, the kind who owned more courage than land. He armed them and supplied them as best he could, and they took the northern route out of the valley, across the bridge, over the high heath at Murdrudalsheidi, down toward the west. Hrafnkell also prepared. He called in his own supporters, and he had no shortage. From his district he gathered about 70 men. They rode together, taking a longer southern route that led over mountain passes and along fjords, eventually bringing them all to the same place, the crowded plain of Thingvellir, where the Law Rock stood above the river. Sámr arrived first and set up his booth. It was not in the usual place for the men of the East Fjords. His group was on the edge, somewhat apart. Soon afterward, Hallfredr, Hrafnkell's father, arrived and set up his own booth. At the assembly, Sámr went from chieftain to chieftain, asking for help. Each one refused. They said the same thing in different ways. There was nothing to gain by taking on Hrafnkell. Those who had challenged him before had all lost. Why should they risk their own power and wealth for the sake of a poor farmer and a stubborn case? Sámr went back to his booth in low spirits. Hallfredr, too, began to doubt that anything good would come of this. Both men sat awake at night, thinking of shame and defeat. Then, one morning, Thorbjörn woke Sámr early and told him bluntly that there was no point staying. They should go home before they humiliated themselves further. Sámr answered sharply. "It's easy for you to say that," he said. "You urged me into this, you refused a settlement many would have taken, and now at the first difficulty you want to run. I won't give up while there is still any chance at all." His words were so firm that Torbjörn broke down and wept. Not far from where they stood by the river, 5 men stepped out of a booth. One of them caught Sámr's eye. He was tall and slender, dressed in green, with an ornate sword at his side. His hair was reddish, going grey, with one lighter lock on the left. Sámr suggested they go and meet him. The man introduced himself as Hrafnkell, son of Thiodric. He said he was from the West Fjords, had travelled widely, even as far as Constantinople, and had served the king of the Greeks. Now he was back in Iceland, staying with his brother Thorgeir, a powerful priest who had brought about 70 men to the assembly. Sámr asked Hrafnkell for help. Hrafnkell answered that he had handed over his chieftainship to his brother when he went abroad, and had not taken it back. He advised Sámr to speak to Thorgeir instead, praising his brother's character and power. Sámr insisted they needed both of them. Hrafnkell, sensing the seriousness of the request, agreed to help. Then he gave Torbjörn a strange piece of advice. He told him to go to Thorgeir's booth early in the morning when everyone was still asleep and deliberately stumble onto Thorgeir's injured foot. Thorgeir was recovering from a wound, and the pain would be sharp. The scene would force a conversation. Sámr thought this plan was odd, but agreed to it. The next morning, he and Torbjörn went into Thorgeir's sleeping hall. Men were still wrapped in their blankets. Torbjörn walked forward and accidentally tripped, falling heavily on the bedfoot. In doing so, he yanked a bandage on Thorgeir's toe. Thorgeir woke with a start and demanded to know who had hurt his healing foot. For a moment, no one answered. Then Hrafnkell came in and smoothed things over. "Cousin, calm down," he said. "It was an old man who stumbled. Everyone has their own pain. You have your foot, he has a son who was killed, and no one to help him." Thorgeir asked who the dead man's enemy was. When he heard the answer, Hrafnkell, he hesitated. Hrafnkell, he said, was dangerous. He didn't want to be dragged into a feud with a man who had already defeated so many. Hrafnkell answered that there was no shame in facing a powerful opponent. In fact, it could increase a man's honor. After some persuasion, Thorgeir agreed to support Sámr and Torbjörn, as long as Hrafnkell was also involved. He warned Sámr that they might either gain some comfort or suffer even greater shame, but told him to proceed carefully, consult them on every important step, and keep their support secret for the moment. Sámr and Torbjörn left that booth in much higher spirits than when they had entered. Other people at the assembly noticed the change, but did not yet know why. Law, outlawry, and humiliation. When the time came for the court to sit at the law rock, Sámr gathered his men and went up with them. He stood before the crowd, summoned his witnesses, and laid out the case against Hrafnkell with skill. The saga says he made no legal mistakes. His voice was clear, his arguments solid. For a man who had never taken on such a powerful opponent, he handled himself well. While he spoke, Hrafnkell and Thorgeir arrived with a large crowd from the west. Their presence alone made people take the case more seriously. Hrafnkell's side had assumed no one would dare support Sámr. Now it was obvious that this was no longer just a quarrel between a poor farmer and a distant chieftain. Word reached Hrafnkell that someone had brought a strong case against him. He rallied his men and tried to push his way to the court, but the area around the law rock was packed. There was no room to enter, no way to interrupt, no way to answer. For once, his size and authority did him no good at all. He never managed to get close enough to defend himself. Sámr continued speaking until the formal declaration was made. Hrafnkell was now a full outlaw, condemned at the assembly. For a man like Hrafnkell, used to winning, used to giving orders and having them obeyed, this was a shock. He went back to his booth, saddled his horse, and left the assembly at once. He rode eastward toward home, acting as if nothing important had happened. But the truth was that this was the first time in his life he had really lost. Back at Thingvellir, Sámr walked around with a lighter step. Many people were quietly pleased. They had watched Hrafnkell for years, heard stories of his harshness, and wondered when, if ever, he would face consequences. Now, at last, he had. The eviction, when the assembly ended and people prepared to ride home, Sámr went to thank Thorgeir and Hrafnkell. Thorgeir asked how he felt. "I am satisfied," Sámr said. "Hrafnkell has been shamed. That will be remembered a long time." Thorgeir answered more cautiously. "In law, he is not truly outlawed yet," he said. "You still have to serve the eviction notice at his home within 2 weeks. And while you've been up here celebrating, Hrafnkell has probably already gone home, taken over your district, and acted as if nothing has changed. You think you've done a great deal by outlawing him, but he will still frighten people, and now you've made yourself more vulnerable." Sámr said he didn't care. The thought of Hrafnkell's humiliation was worth a great deal to him. Thorgeir said he believed his cousin Hrafnkell wouldn't abandon Sámr now. They had involved themselves too deeply. They promised to accompany him back east, but wanted to avoid the usual routes. He studied the hills above the valley, tracing the ridge lines with his eyes, trying to imagine a path that would spare him the muddy lowlands and the twisting rivers that slowed every traveler. The old route cut straight through bogs that could swallow a horse up to its knees, and anyone who had crossed it after rain carried the memory in their bones. But Hallfredr had never been the type to stay satisfied with what everyone else accepted. If the usual road was miserable, then he'd simply make a better one. So he climbed the slope, testing the ground with the slow, steady patience of a man who understood the land as well as he understood livestock. What he found was a narrow, higher trail. Rough, yes, and longer than the flat path below, but dry even after a storm. It clung to the side of the fell, cutting across patches of stone and heath, keeping travelers above the worst of the wetlands. To most people it wouldn't look like a road at all, but to those who lived nearby, who knew the valley's moods and its hidden dangers, it became a safer alternative. Over time, that trail earned a name, Hallfredastigur, Hallfredr's Way. And though not many used it, the ones who did swore it saved them hours of scraping mud from their boots. While Hallfredr was carving new paths into the landscape, Hrafnkell was carving his own path through the social world of the valley. Word had begun spreading about the young man at Adalbol, generous on feast days, stern in disputes, unbending when it came to his vows. Some admired him, some feared him, and some did both at the same time. His devotion to Freyr grew deeper, he offered half his best possessions to the god, and he spoke openly about the bond he felt with the divine. People took those claims seriously. You didn't speak lightly about Freyr in the East Fjords, not when the harvest depended on weather that could turn against you without warning. So, when Hrafnkell built his temple, tall timber beams, a roof of turf that kept out the winter winds, and a sacred space lit by the glow of carefully tended fires, his authority rose just as fast as the smoke from its hearth. But even with that growing influence, the heart of Hrafnkell's pride was still Freyfaxi, the stallion whose name traveled farther than many men ever did. Travelers swore they had never seen an animal like him, a reddish-brown coat that shimmered as if the sun lived inside it, strength in every stride, and an alertness that made him seem almost aware of the conversations held around him. Hrafnkell treated him not as livestock but as a companion, and in a moment shaped by both affection and arrogance, he made the vow that would eventually alter the lives of everyone involved. If anyone rode Freyfaxi without permission, they would die. There would be no argument, no payment, no forgiveness. To some it was foolish, to others it was admirable. But no one doubted he meant it, and this is where the threads of the story begin to pull tight, where one family's poverty, another man's pride, and a simple attempt at doing a day's work would twist together into a conflict that no one could have predicted. Because across the valley, a farm was struggling, and on that farm lived a young man who would unknowingly push Hrafnkell's vow from words into action. The young man across the valley was Einar, the son of a poor farmer trying to make ends meet. When he took a herding job at Adalbol, he accepted Hrafnkell's only strict rule: never ride Freyfaxi. With 12 other mares available, that seemed easy enough, but one summer morning, Einar lost almost 30 sheep in the fog. After days of searching on foot and finding nothing, he grew desperate. He needed speed. He needed a horse that could cover ground, and Freyfaxi, calm and close by, looked like the only chance he had to save his reputation. So Einar broke the rule. He rode Freyfaxi across ridges and along riverbanks until the lost flock appeared, huddled on stony flats where he had passed earlier. He drove them home, grateful, exhausted, and unaware that the horse beneath him was already soaked in sweat and heading straight for Adalbol the moment he was released. Hrafnkell saw the stallion return in a state no one had ever seen before. He knew instantly what had happened. The next morning, he rode up to the mountain dairy, spoke briefly with Einar, and after hearing the young man admit the truth, struck him down. No ceremony, no hesitation. His vow had been broken, and to Hrafnkell, a vow was sacred. Einar's father, Thorbjörn, demanded compensation. Hrafnkell refused, and that refusal set off a chain of alliances and resentments that carried the story forward. Thorbjörn found support through his kinsman Sámr, a man known for his sharp mind and stubborn resolve. Together they brought a case against Hrafnkell at the Althing. Against all expectations, they won. Hrafnkell lost his land, his temple, and his position. He wasn't executed, but he was humiliated, a punishment he felt as sharply as any wound. Sámr took Hrafnkell's home, his followers, and the authority he once held, and for a time it looked like justice had been served. But sagas don't freeze in that moment. Years passed. Hrafnkell rebuilt his life in another valley, working harder than ever, gaining new followers, and earning respect with a quieter, humbler approach. He stopped worshipping Freyr, stopped making bold vows, and focused on survival and trust. Then, Sámr's brother, Eyvindr, returned from abroad, wealthy, proud, and unaware of the fragile peace in the region. Hrafnkell attacked him in the highlands, killing him and his companions. When Sámr tried to rally support to retaliate, no one wanted to challenge Hrafnkell again. His power had returned. Before Sámr could act, Hrafnkell arrived with a large band of men, seized him from his bed, and forced him to choose death or life under Hrafnkell's authority. Sámr chose life. Hrafnkell took back Adalbol. He restored his position, and from that moment on he ruled fairly. He didn't boast, didn't seek revenge beyond what he had already taken, and didn't repeat the pride that had cost him everything the first time. In the end, the saga leaves us with a quiet truth. Strength won the conflict, but character shaped what came after. Hrafnkell became a better leader after losing everything. Sámr had won a legal victory, but couldn't hold power without the force to defend it. And Hrafnkell, the horse at the heart of the story, remained the reminder of how a single choice can ripple through an entire valley. That's the way stories traveled in Iceland, not as moral lessons carved in stone, but as examples of how one decision, one vow, or one moment of pride could shape the lives of everyone around you. And so the saga ends where many sagas do, not with heroes or villains, but with people trying to live with the consequences of the promises they made.